Next question. The phenomena, the pagan Grecian idea of theater. Our expert on ancient Greek culture, Father Damascene, is washing dishes. He doesn't, I can say things he doesn't have. Oh, pardon me. There was, I don't know whether he mentioned, but there was, since time immemorial, such a thing as theater, or certain presentation, sort enactment to evoke a particular message, idea, feeling, or whatever. In all cultures, it's there. But the most refined one was in Greece, where they had these plays, Electra and Onyx Rex and so on, whose, mostly tragedies, whose purpose was to evoke in the viewer a sense of something extremely important, like tragedy, people die and so on. It's very important. It's a question of life and death. But so that the viewer, seeing this, will, by participating, sort of viewing it, will at the same time get rid of that element which bothers him. That was catastrophism. The idea was this: they were religious plays. People would come like on a pilgrimage. They would come and sit there, and they would have special sandwiches. They would feed them and all that, and they would stand there, and those actors would enact all kinds of tragic things and all these poses, which are all symbolic and all supposed to be a certain message in the symbolism in the poses and positions. And the people who come to watch, they would take part in it and would get spiritual transformation. They would get a certain change in their attitude. If they had a certain hatred for something, now they would get rid of it. Or certain fears, they would get rid of it. They would have a different understanding. Now this idea was carried over to, of course, Christian society. But Christian society rejected theater for one reason, one big reason, because the church system functioned as this theater. That's why St. John of Darmstadt could not tolerate theater, because he said they compete with us. In other words, it's a divine drama. And the church construction, as you know, it is like a theater. You even have a curtain. But it is divine. It is not play acting. Just like in those ancient times. Those actors that stood there and wept and all that business, they actually were performing a particular job. They were vehicles by which people would associate with their spiritual, their state, and would either get rid of certain things or acquire this particular impression and so on. It was the audience, the person, was supposed to partake, be moved by that which took place in those pagan spectacles. And Christianity was, after it became free, and it was in Greece, and it was in the time where Christianity, that is the pagan culture, reached its height. If you read Gregory the theologian, you can see clearly how dramatic, or rather how theatrical, in quotes, how dramatic he expresses some ideas. Some of his epistles are filled with these phrases which came straight into our church canons. The whole of Paschal canon, Christmas carol, canons, during Matins. It all comes from St. Gregory the theologian, who was very much involved in presenting Christian message to the mentality at that time of the Greeks. So he was aware, in fact, very often all these deities are mentioned, all these Venus and so on, they're all mentioned. Not in order to acknowledge them, no, but to use this very principle which they understand, by which he could come across with that spiritual message. It's interesting that the whole word muses were sort of deities of inspiration. The word music comes from that. The museum comes from that. It's muses. He talks about evoking the muses, the inspiration, so that Christians can do things. In other words, this is what's expected in the test. Christianity is divided into three categories, right? There's Catacomb, Byzantium, and post-Byzantium, which is now, or actually post-Christian era, which we experience now. So in Catacombs, everything was concealed like an embryo. They developed the whole thing. When they became free, they came out of the Catacombs, mind you. Their job was to missionize, to bring the good tidings to the people of these various temperaments, these various cultures that people experience. They had to make the message of Christianity palatable and understandable to these people of the Roman Greek culture. So they had to use their language. And thus, the liturgics came out of that. The subject of liturgics we'll discuss with Father Girassi. But for our purpose, when the question rises in arts, it is very necessary for us to acknowledge that the church service is bound up that which is, so now we understand the theater. Now the key phenomenon is this. Byzantium opened up otherworldliness in the best way they can in the language of that refined culture there, to the barbarous, all kinds of nations and peoples and so on. They opened up, they developed a language, both through speaking and language of art, language of music, theater and so on. They developed a language by which this beauty, otherworldly beauty, would be transferable, so that people with various stages, whatever their culture they had, no matter how primitive, they would understand. The function of missionaries was not to change people. There was not to change, but confront them with the message of Jesus Christ. And they had to use the language of those people, and not necessarily through utterance. The language of art, the language of music, the language of architecture, custom, and so on. And they did this job. And then approximately at the turn of the first millennium, then occurred the beginning of apostasy, which finally followed